Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and welcome to the show that's going to be answering our viewers' property related questions. And joining me today to do just that are our team of experts, Ranjan Bhattacharya, property developer, investor, mentor and TV commentator. Welcome to you, Ranjan. And Andrew Binstock, co-founder and MD of Auction House London. Welcome to you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Nice to see you guys again. And I'm going to kick off with you, Andrew. What would the panel suggest are the key reasons for selling a residential property by auction as opposed to conventional agency routes?
There's lots of reasons. The core ones are competitive bidding, which therefore pushes the price up. Again, I forever have to explain this to people. The way the private treaty market works right now is the first past the post. If you put something on at 299,950 and the first person that walks through the door says, I'll pay you 299,950, a little sold sign goes up, STC written in titular letters, no one knows what that means. And the next person that says, can I please view that house, says, no, sorry, it's already sold. Well, it's not sold, no money's changed hands whatsoever. You go to auction, somebody can offer you 299,950, marvellous, and then someone else pays you 310, 320, and so it goes up. So competitive bidding, certainly under the pressure cooker of an auction, will achieve more money typically than an estate agent. That's number one. And the other core benefit is the speed of sale. It's simply a case of never mind going under offer and then waiting months on end. At the point of the gavel coming down, the purchaser is now in a binding contract, has to put down a 10% deposit, and the seller has that comfort in knowing, assuming everyone behaves, that their completion date is set in stone and they can make plans and provisions for their onward journey. So effectively, why would you use an auctioneer over an estate agent? You will get a higher price, all things being equal, and it will be sold exactly when we say it's sold, rather than hopefully 6 months down the road, you're still waiting for it to sell.
Okay, let me just add a note of caution there,
Sure.
if you like, and so just put you to task a little bit. I think I have a mental picture of an auction with most of the participants, the buyers, being perhaps people almost in the trade. So therefore, they're not going to want to pay the sort of retail prices that an estate agent would set on a property. Is that a valid point?
That was valid 20 plus years ago, for sure.
I'm showing my age now.
No, not at all. You're absolutely right. There is still a sense of auctioneers being the playground of builders and developers and people looking for bargains, investors, people like Ranjan. The reality is there are those guys and we need those people because a lot of the properties are unmortgageable, they're problems, they've had their roof burnt off, and so we need those guys in the market. But we market all our properties in exactly the same way an estate agent does through all the conventional property portal channels, won't name them by name, and therefore our audience is now end users and people who are looking to buy to live in and have family homes and whatnot. The transparency of auction has changed a lot as well. Legal packs have to be disclosed, all information is out there. Look, I'm not going to say every single buyer can buy from auction because if you're in a chain yourself, unless the completion dates all marry up, you won't be in a situation. But most people now can buy through auction in exactly the same way they would have through an estate agent, and they will be under no worse sort of set of circumstances, as long as you've got the money to do it. And you've got to have your 10% on the day, and you've got to be sure that you will be able to get the remaining 90% within that 20-day period.
I mean, a lot of people these days are jumping on the bandwagon of the popularity of bridging, aren't they?
Bridging's massive.
To do this in auction, so that is possible to
Absolutely.
set up.
Listen, the explosion of bridging companies is something I've witnessed firsthand. There used to be one or two, now there's dozens and dozens. It's more expensive often, but not always, but it is more expensive, but it's a short-term fix and it does protect the buyer from ever getting to that point where they're thinking, crikey, I might lose my deposit here because my regular bank is not performing on the time frame I need. So bridging is an absolute lifesaver for so many of our buyers. And you're absolutely right, Stephen, it has kept that market completely open to us now.
Okay. And just one other thing, just for the benefit of perhaps people who are watching that have never gone to auction or never done anything other than just use the conventional route. An estate agent will come around, they'll take the pictures, they'll produce a brochure of one type or another, often dependent on the sort of scale and price of the property, what that brochure will look like. How much help would you give somebody coming to you with a property for sale, has never done it before? Have they got to provide all the photos and or what?
No, not at all. So we do everything an estate agent does and probably more. So ultimately a seller will come to us and say, here's my house for sale. We take the photos, we do a video walkthrough. We've done all those really clever, again, I won't name them, but those amazing 3D floor plans that you can spin around and look into every room and look from above, the dollhouse floor plan. We do all of that. I mean, we've now started, this is brand new actually, we've started in the last few months to ask, people are asking for drone cameras now. So we've now got a company that will go out and do drone. We do everything that you will get from some very sexy, glossy brochure, if that's what you want. But ultimately, auction has always been about trying to get buyers just to turn up to the viewings and show an interest and then go and see it for themselves. So, you know, we won't sit and write up these sort of wonderful diatribes of how we'll say, here's a nice house, this is it, these are the rooms you've got, have a look at a walkthrough, have a look at the floor plan, have a look at whatever, and please satisfy yourselves that you're happy with what it is. But yeah, the world of auctions has moved on so much from just one external photo and then good luck.
Yeah, great stuff. Any comment on that, Ranjan?
I think there are all sorts of reasons why people sell at auction. Sometimes there are a lot of landlords selling up now and their properties are tenanted. So that doesn't suit the estate agent situation. And I think the people are accepting, by and large, that it's a two-step approach to getting an auction purchase financed. There's short-term purchase bridging to buy it, then you get it into, package it up into a mortgageable state to get the best possible mortgage valuation for the long-term loan. And I think people accept that rather than, I'm not sure whether that many people are trying to get a mortgage in the 28-day time frame.
Well, you have touched on a really important point, which is that a lot of auction properties are unmortgageable, and people don't understand which ones sit in which camp. So short leasehold flats we see a lot of, uninhabitable properties, and we get loads of those, which are brilliant. The developers and our investors, they love something they can add value to, and they can, make better and move some walls or whatever. But they're often not mortgageable. So, I think I'm glad we've touched on this actually. A buyer should always check before they even start their journey. Can I get finance on this? Bearing in mind my own personal predicament as well, plays a part in that. And once the answer is yes, then it's full steam ahead. But you're right, that's a good point.
Yeah, but the consequences of not getting it are quite steep, aren't they?
There you go.
There's your 10% retention, isn't
Gone.
it? Gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Ranjan, how do the panel think that the upcoming changes in stamp duty rates will affect the residential market in 2025?
Oh dear. Whenever the government interferes in the market and changes tax rates and stuff like that, it always has unintended consequences. And as we know, on 1st of April 2025, there are some changes. It's not really changes. What this new government have done is not extended the reductions that the previous government put in place. So the previous government reduced the amount that stamp duty was payable on a transaction from 250, to 125, and the Labour law are not extending that. Now, I got a sneaky suspicion there's a spring statement coming up. They're desperate for growth. I've got a sneaky suspicion they may, you've got to assume the government has common sense. And if you assume there's an ounce of common sense in there, they may extend that. But don't hold your breath. But at the moment, yes, it's going to cost a couple of grand more on stamp duty because of those thresholds. The other massive issue for investors, particularly buy-to-let investors, and people buying in limited companies, is this surcharge, which has already taken effect. It's 5%. So that means to make an investment property purchase, if you're going to let it out or whatever, you've got to come up with that 5% from somewhere. And I do see a lot of investors, if they are looking at making those sort of purchases, targeting the auction space because they are factoring that increased stamp duty into the price they're willing to pay for the property, which makes auction purchases very attractive for those sort of investor buyers. And I think the other change that's happening, of course, is the first-time buyer. First-time buyers have an increased level at which stamp duty becomes payable. That is all being slashed as well. So what we're going to have is a cliff edge, which is what should never happen. You have this cliff edge where solicitors and agents and buyers are running around trying to get purchases through by 31st of March 2025 before the new stamp duty rates take effect. And then what will inevitably happen is that there will be a little bit of a lull, because a lot of the sales that would have happened in April, may have happened ahead of March. But then we have what is usually a spring bounce. So it's all a little bit up in the air how much of an effect it will have. But I think whenever you have a cliff edge change in rules, the months that follow are likely to be a little bit less in terms of sales volumes compared to the months that preceded that cliff edge.
So in other words, it's not really going to kickstart any super activity over a period
Far
of time.
from it,
Yeah.
unless they do something in that spring statement.
Yeah. How do you think it will affect overseas purchases? I've worked on buildings here where 70% of the purchasers have been overseas buyers. Mm-hmm. Do you think this increase or supplement on the stamp duty will affect that?
I'm not really, because I think overseas buyers were already affected by higher than normal stamp duty rates. A lot of overseas buyers, and I'm talking about overseas buyers who are investing in central London properties. By and large, these guys are doing it for different reasons. It's lowly geared or practically no loans at all. And it's normally a case of diversification, geographical diversification, and preservation of wealth, and parking some money in what is a safe property market, and parking it for those reasons. So because that's their motivation, I don't think it's going to affect too much.
So the real hit is going to be on young people again, isn't it, really?
Young people, and also new buy-to-let investment. I think the 5% surcharge is a little bit too high. That's a surcharge. So on top of everything else, it's 5% extra if you dare to buy a property to let out.
Yeah.
So that's going to affect supply.
Yeah, if you're going for yield, if your whole reason for buying is purely for you're buying the income, if it's no longer washing its own face, then you've got a problem, haven't you?
Well, you're almost taking another 10% out, aren't you, really?
It changes the leverage equation, because you've got to put 25% in for a deposit minimum. Then you've got this high stamp duty. So the amount of upfront cash you've got to put into a property begins to upset the viability.
I've thought for a long time the thing to do is to charge stamp duty to the seller, not the buyer, because that way it becomes fundable. And Andrew, are the catalogue details of property for sale by auction covered by the same regulations governing estate agency descriptions? I'm asking particularly in respect of condition.
With condition, no. There is no obligation to describe in fine detail the exact state of every single room in the property, because every property comes with a video walkthrough, multiple open days to go and inspect, and typically internal pictures as well. So no buyer should be relying simply on the words in the catalogue when it comes to description. You can rely on it for what rooms are on what floors and where the property is and the address and things like that. But there is no obligation to say, this is the exact amount of work that needs doing, and this is the exact state of repair, and there's a radiator missing in this room, and the water doesn't work in that part. None of that. It is all about describing what the property looks like insofar as the internal layout. But when it comes to opinion, i.e. how much work would be, that's down to the buyer. And we always say this, please don't rely on somebody at the end of the phone when you say, could I get this done up for £5,000? We're not going to answer those questions. You must see it. You must decide what it's going to cost. And therefore, when it comes to auction descriptions, which have always been quite different to an estate agency sort of write-up, we will tend not to say something unless it's really obvious. So when we've got a completely derelict property that hasn't been touched in 50 years, we might say, under the same ownership for 50 years to give it a little bit of wow factor. And we will say the property requires a full program of refurbishment.
Yeah.
But it'll just be a blanket sentence like that, just to make sure the buyer knows I'm not moving into this the day I buy it.
Andrew, quite interesting. The auction format has changed over recent years. At one time, you'd go into a room, a town hall or a village hall or something, there'd be 50 or 100 people there, and you'd be standing there with your gavel. But now the thing is nationwide, isn't it?
Correct.
You have an auction, and via the portals and various internet advertising media, you'll have a national audience.
Absolutely.
what sort of percentage of those people actually visit the properties as opposed to buy just online information?
Okay, that is a brilliant question. And I don't know the exact numbers of human bodies that walk through the building who then go on and put their hand in the air. What we can measure is how many winning bidders tell us afterwards, I've never seen the house or the flat. So, and it is an astronomical number. The flip side to that is we do put out some phenomenally accurate floor plans and the dollhouse and the 3Ds and the images and the video walkthroughs. And we're very mindful of the fact, Stephen, that our auctions are held in London. A lot of our buyers come from London and the property might be in Cumbria or wherever it is. And it's very unrealistic for somebody to drive 7 hours, look at a relatively cheap property, drive 7 hours home and probably not even win it. Who would like to do that when you can actually just gain most of the information you need from watching all the information we put out on the internet? So once upon a time, that would have been a scary answer. They're just buying literally blind from one external photo. Nowadays, do you really need to go and touch it and feel the building with your own hands and eyes? Probably not, but it's advisable. We always say to any buyer, you know, do every piece of due diligence, and that includes inspections, that you are happy with. If you're a professional, you're an experienced Ranjan type character and you're quite happy, you know the area roughly, and you're content with just looking at a couple of floor plans, go for it.
Yeah. I suppose the other temptation is if you're not experienced at these things, you know, you go to perhaps a London auction or you're looking at it online and you mentioned, say, Cumbria or something, you think, crikey, that's cheap.
Yes.
And then, but you overlook the sort of after process. You've got to renovate it, perhaps you've got to let it, you've got to manage it, and if it's 200, 300, 400 miles away, it's not always an easy story, is it?
Stephen, I can't tell. I've been auctioning now for over 25 years. I wonder how many times I've sold a property that's probably in negative equity, i.e. you've got to spend £40,000 on it to make it worth £40,000.
Yeah.
You know, this happens certainly in the north. There are so many properties that on paper look staggering value, certainly when you think about what the rental potential is, but no one ever thinks about how much money do I need to spend to get it to that level.
Yes, and control getting it to
that. And that's it.
Yeah.
There's one other factor, I think, which is it's context. So, you know, you're looking at a flat, you've got the floor plans, photographs, that's fine. But who's above, who's below, what's the block like, what the communal areas like, who's next door, are there any unsightly sort of neighbours? Is there a pylon in the neighbour's back garden or something?
But you know as well, we see houses. We see houses where the entire road is boarded up. And ours is the only one that doesn't have shutters on the windows. Now that's not Mr. You know, there's the property, that's what you're buying. But he's absolutely right. If you don't know what all the neighbouring houses look like, how can you really get context?
It's amazing how brave some people can be. And sometimes it's the banks. I can remember doing a consultancy job for one of the banks. They sent me up to North London somewhere, and a developer had talked this ownership consortium of allowing him to put a penthouse on the top of this building, sort of air development, as it were.
Yeah.
And it had gone horribly wrong, and the bank had asked me to go and have a look at it, and I went, and it was on top of this most awful social housing building. You had to climb over the prams and the bikes and the washing, you know, to get to the top. Granted, the penthouse on top was very nice, but whether you'd want to sort of try and get to it after dark or something, it might be a different story. And I said to the bank, I said, who did this? And I went, I didn't lend it. I didn't. And I said, well, who went to look at it? Oh, nobody. We did a desktop study, and I thought, oh, great, you know, and I could just see that sort of thing happening at auction. Really.
And it does.
Yeah, I can believe it.
And it absolutely does.
Yeah. Okay, Ranjan, anything to add to that?
He probably built that penthouse you're talking about.
Yeah. Go and see them. But there's an alternative to go and see them as well. And I've done this once where you use one of these viewing agent services. So people often use them as the seller, but you can also use those services as a buyer, where you say, look, go and see this property on my behalf. When you're down there, we'll set up a video call, show me this, show me that, show me the context. If you can't really get down there at the block viewing times, that's a best second.
Okay.
That's a good point, I never thought that.
All right, so Ranjan, the government seemed keen to discourage the smaller buy-to-let investor, Would the panel recommend that the smaller investor now look more closely at investing in perhaps small commercial properties as an alternative?
I think you're right. I mean, the government, not just this government, but the previous government as well, have over a period of years discouraged smaller scale buy-to-let residential investors. And I think it really is a case of go big or go home. I think that's one alternative for the residential buy-to-let investor. I think the days of having buy-to-let units, a portfolio, based on having a flat here and a flat there and a little house here and a little house there, simply doesn't work. If you look at what the big players are that are coming, what they're doing, who are coming into the market, they want a concentration of rental units within one building. And I think that's what works. It gives you the economies of scale. So residential buy-to-let does work if you have got 3, 4 or more units within one building. There are alternatives, as you pointed out, to doing commercial buy-to-let. Commercial buy-to-let has a lot of attractive features because of the regulation. Commercial letting agreements are governed under an Act of Parliament in 1954, as opposed to constant tinkering with residential buy-to-let rules and regulations.
Oh, with that yet to come this year.
Exactly,
Yeah.
renters' rights and all of that. But commercial tenancies are very much business contracts in the landlord's favour. If you don't pay, you go kind of thing. So that's good. But then the leverage options are far less with commercial property than with residential property.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Just talk about the funding of that. I'm thinking of people that say, right, well, okay, I'd love to bid a property to enhance my pension or enhance my future prospects. Now, with a buy-to-let mortgage in residential, as a broad principle, they will look at the property, the rental, the income, and the security of tenure, as opposed to looking at you so much. If you want a pure buy-to-let mortgage, and you may pay an extra % for that, but there is a certainly more liberal attitude to lending you that money than perhaps on your own home.
Yes.
Does the same apply if that same person was looking to buy a commercial property or not?
No, I mean, it depends what you're doing with it. I mean, if you're building it or converting it, then that's a different type of loan. But if you're buying it as a buy-to-let, then so much depends on the quality of tenant, the length of the lease, and the amount they're paying. Because with commercial property, you've got this funny thing where two identical properties, one tenanted to a high street multiple or something, for 10 years left on the lease, high rent, and an empty unit next door, identical physical buildings, they would have different prices. Whereas with residential property, that wouldn't happen. It doesn't matter who's in it, whether it's a high-end professional or it's empty, its bricks and mortar value will be valued at roughly the same. But that then presents an opportunity, because one of the best ways of adding value to a commercial property is not doing any building work at all. You buy a property because you know you can let it to someone, and then you simply get that tenant in, and then you've added significant value to that unit with no building works whatsoever.
Okay, good. Anything to add to that, Andrew?
He's exactly right. Commercial is all about the income, and it's all about the strength of the covenant. And it's all about, exactly as he says, when that first review date is. If it's 5 years away and you're let to a very well-known branded coffee shop, you know you're getting that money. That exact same building next door, boarded up, is a totally different proposition.
Almost worthless, isn't
Correct.
it?
And residential, everyone knows, it's all about capital growth. You know, your 2-bed flat in wherever it is, a posh part of London. You know, that graph's going up. It's always going to be in demand. But how many empty shops are there on even nice high streets now?
But the thing is that I think we may be entering a recession. Now, in a recession, of course, everyone still needs a home. Yeah. But recessions, one thing that happens in the recessions, of course, is that businesses close and businesses occupy commercial properties. So commercial property is far more impacted by recession than residential property. And I really believe that if you're looking at renting out particularly retail units and smaller offices and stuff like that, you've got to look at areas where there's a level of affluence in the immediate vicinity. So there are places up north where, you know, and I've noticed this with auctions actually. I've seen a property let to a same high street multiple at the same rent, and it will be in Tunbridge Wells, and the same tenant is up north somewhere, paying the same rent, but the values of the property are completely different. Because if the one up north becomes empty, the ability to relet it is limited.
Market rate,
But the Tunbridge Wells one, if they pack up, you can easily relet it.
Correct.
So if you look for commercial units in areas which have affluence, you're pretty much more recession-proof than in areas where there's not affluence.
Yes. Andrew, obviously, when somebody who is, shall we say, not in the profession is buying at auction, how much do the auction company guide that buyer in terms of pointing out these little dangers to them, if you like?
So the world of caveat emptor died a long time ago. In fact, when I started out in 1999, it was still prevalent. That all moved on. So there's no buyer beware anymore. I mean, there is buyer beware insofar as don't be silly and don't do stupid things, i.e. buy a property without inspecting it, without reading a legal pack and just going in completely blind. But the concept of material information disclosure is still prevalent in the world of auctions. You are not allowed to describe something as a 3-bed if you know it to be a 1-bed. You are not allowed to deliberately mislead and say, oh, it's got planning permission for this when it doesn't, or that's already been rejected, whatever it might be. So we are bound by those. However, there is one big caveat to that and most auctioneers are selling many properties. It's unrealistic for all their staff to know every single minutiae of that property. So when a member of my staff is asked the direct question, can I build this out? Can I do this? Can I do that? The answer will always be, that's on you. You must find it out. So you've got to appreciate that the amount of information we have is strictly governed by what's obvious and what we've been told. But yes, you can. And we had one amazing story. I remember it clearly, the 3-bed, 1-bed story. So a seller had given us a property to sell, described it as a 3-bed. It was up north. We're down in London. We had no way of checking it because there was no access given. It was apparently occupied and that occupant refused all access. This happens. It happens a lot. So here we are. We've described it exactly as told and we're covered by our terms and conditions which state the vendor has told us this. So we're just passing. As it turned out, the winning bidder went up to see the property the following day after the auction and met the neighbour. Couldn't get into the building, but the neighbour came outside and said, have you just bought this? Yes. What did you buy? And described it, says, no, it's 1-bed. Now, the buyer then reports that straight to us immediately. My seller's attitude was tough. And we said, no. This is so material. This is there's no way you didn't know this was a 1-bed and you've described it. So in the end, we said to our seller, we are giving this purchaser all their money back, all their deposit, the whole lot. If you want to come after us under the rules of auction, you're welcome to, but you won't win. And in the end, we managed to convince the seller that the right thing to do was to hand everything back and put that buyer back to as if they'd never won it. This is very rare, by the way. Fascinatingly enough, that seller then gave it to a rival auctioneer who sold it as a 3-bed, and I never found out what that winning bidder had, what journey that winning bidder went on. But we very rarely will come across this, and I'm pleased to say that. Most of our sellers are super honest. Most things are obvious, and the legal pack will cover anything that wasn't obvious. You know, a lease plan will show you if it's this big rather than this big, it will come up quite quickly.
Sure. Okay, well, on that note of honesty, we're going to draw the programme to a close, and I'm going to say a big thank you to Ranjan Bhattacharya and Andrew Binstock for coming in today. Thank you both very much and imparting your knowledge to our viewers. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on the show when we'll be answering more of our viewers' questions.